Okay, welcome to your introduction to Photoshop. Photoshop's an amazing program. It's extremely complex. There's a lot to it. We're barely going to scratch the surface of it. I'm going to try to focus on the things that are going to let you be successful for the types of things that we do this year in Photoshop. We can do a lot of fun projects, and the key is that these initial lessons are extremely important for things you're going to be doing throughout the unit that we're doing in Photoshop. So do your best to really take good notes maybe and just really focus in on what I'm talking about. So let's take a look at what you see on your screen right now. So let's look at the obvious part here in the center of the screen, the picture here. This is from a project that you may or may not do. I may change this project, but from previous years where students take things and put it onto a background doesn't quite belong. So we have a desert background here with some snowy type objects on them. So taking a look here in the middle of the screen, this is your work area. This is where you will work and bring in your images and things like that. I want you to notice that there's a tab here at the top. So this is going to be just like a browser where you can have multiple tabs open with different images in them. So for example, I'm just going to go ahead and open up another image right now. It doesn't matter what it is. But notice it's on its own tab and I can go back and forth. If I wanted to, I could bring what's in this image into this one here, and I will show you that when we do a different project, but that's not what this is for right now. But this middle area is where you'll do your work, basically. Okay? Over on the right area, let's do this first of all. So if we go to Window and I go to Workspace, we are going to use what's called the Essentials Workspace. If you ever are working and lose some what are called palettes, so everything over here, these are called palettes. So you'll notice that there's like different tabs within palettes. Like layers is probably the most important Photoshop palette. You need to have that visible pretty much all of the time. You'll notice you can see, for example, the girl on the sled in the middle. You can kind of see the thumbnail image that girl is on this layer called layer 3 at this point in the palette here. But if you ever lose your palette, so if, for example, you can drag palettes around, it's very flexible. So on one hand, that's great. On the other hand, it's very easy to accidentally close them or minimize them and lose them or whatever. So for example, if I lose my layers palette, if I go up to Window and hover over the word Workspace, I can go to Reset Essentials. So I'm on the Essentials palette. That's a great one for us to work with. If I click Reset Essentials, it's going to bring back everything the way that it was here. So these are your palettes over here on the right. For various projects, I'll focus on them. I'm not going to really focus on them now, but just know when I'm talking about palettes, that's what I'm talking about right here. So with these palettes, each palette has different things that help you be successful in Photoshop. Like I said, the layers palette is extremely important. There's a few others as well, such as the history palette that we'll talk about in future projects, everything like that. But the key is all under this window menu, this huge long list here. These are all different palettes. So in some projects, I might tell you, you want to have your brushes palette active. Notice that they're not all checked, only some of them are. The ones that are checked are ones that are currently in use. So if I said we want to have our brushes palette active for a project, you would go ahead and click brushes so that it shows up. Okay, moving along the window, let's go over to the left-hand side of the screen here. This is our tools palette. This is probably the second most important part of Photoshop here because this is where all the tools are that you use to edit your images, to paint your images, to select your images, to add text, to add gradients. There's a whole bunch of things, make selections that you do with these tools over here. We certainly don't have time to go over all of the different tools, but you'll notice if I hover over a tool, we get a quick explanation of what's going on with the tool. Additionally, if you do a long press, so not a double click, not a single click, like a click and hold for just a half a second, if the tool has multiple subtools, they will show up in that long press. Like a very common one is the paint bucket / gradient tool in the middle here. A lot of times you'll be doing a project and I'll say, get your gradient tool. And you might not be able to see it because it's buried in another palette. So you'll start to learn where things are grouped together. But basically, tools are usually grouped by similar things. Like for example, the very top one is the move tool that you use quite a bit. But the next few are what are called selection tools, and they're kind of grouped together in similar selection tools. Like for example, these are what are called marquees. So you have your rectangular marquee, your elliptical marquee. Okay, your lasso tool, your polygonal lasso, your magnetic lasso. These are all things that you may or may not use on a regular basis in Photoshop. But there's groups of tools within the palette. And then last thing I want to point out for this particular video is when you click on a tool, this very top attribute bar right here will update based on the tool. So for example, if I go to the brush tool, okay, along the top here, I have different characteristics or different attributes that I can change about the brush tool. I can change my brush size, I can change the type of brush, all sorts of things that I can change here in these tools, the mode. Most of this stuff isn't going to make sense to you at the moment, but these are how they change. Now, I'm going to click on a different tool. Watch how this is going to change right here. So I'm going to click on a selection tool. Notice that it is changed what the attributes are that can be selected for a particular tool. Okay, so that's an overview of the layout of the window and how we work. In the next couple lessons, we'll get into a little bit more details about how you actually do things here in Photoshop.